Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lane College President, Dr. Logan Hampton.
Good evening. It is my high honor to welcome you to Lane College. Since 1882, Lane College has transformed lives, liberated minds and souls, and celebrated excellence in Christ as we help students develop the power of their potential. Among our students, you will find accents from California to the Carolinas, from Milwaukee to Mobile, and all parts in between. 60% of our students are from Tennessee, a majority from rural West Tennessee, 40% from outside of the state of Tennessee, with approximately 80% remaining in the state. Lane is a net importer of intellectual talent. One role of a college is to convene conversations of importance to the community. There is no more critical conversation than the one we will witness tonight, as these candidates share their visions and lift their voices on behalf of the people of Tennessee. As a resident of rural West Tennessee, I am especially interested in hearing what they have to say about education and the economy. Education is central to sustain the democracy and fuel our economy. And such a conversation is only possible with the support of many. And I thank the Jackson Chamber, WBBJ, Jackson Sun, USA Today Network Tennessee, Jackson Energy Authority, and Leadership Tennessee. Special thanks to the Stone River Group, Madison County Sheriff Department, Jackson Police Department, the Lane College Security, and especially the Lane College students who have been buzzing around this afternoon. Tonight, I pray for these candidates as they crisscross the state. May God bless them. May God bless our time together tonight. May God bless the people of West Tennessee and our great state. Let's have a great conversation. Welcome.
Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Keenan Lowry, and remain standing for the national anthem performed by Christopher Guyton.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, unto the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watch were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Please welcome Jackson Chamber President and CEO, Kyle Spurgeon.
Christopher told me backstage he was nervous. I think he lied. That was fantastic, Christopher. If not for a conversation during the summer of 2017 at Leadership Tennessee, tonight's forum would not have happened. One of my Leadership Tennessee classmates, Michael Anastasi, Vice President of News for USA Today Tennessee Network, mentioned in a group discussion they would be organizing a series of gubernatorial forums across the state in 2018. In the parking lot, after our session, I asked Michael, what about doing one of those sessions in Jackson? Judge Brandon Gibson was my ride back to Jackson that day. If you know Brandon, you know she looked at me funny because I stayed in the parking lot too long and it was time for her to hurry up and get back to Jackson. She has been critical to the success of tonight's event. The conversation continued over the next several months. Dr. Logan Hampton and Lane College agreed to host tonight's forum, and they, as you can tell, have been a fantastic host. WBBJ agreed to provide 90 minutes of airtime on their ABC and CBS channels. And if you know anything about the media business, you appreciate the fact that it is a tremendous amount of airtime to dedicate to tonight's forum. Jackson Energy Authority agreed to produce tonight's event and provide a live feed to WBBJ and to USA Today so that they can stream this event across the entire state. Kelly McAllister agreed to serve as the moderator for tonight's forum. You'll meet Kelly in just a second. Early on in the planning, the Jackson Chamber retained the Stones River Group to help us manage and to coordinate tonight's event. One brag to our entire chamber team, and particularly Ryan Porter and Mandy White, who have coordinated everything going on here tonight, and also to Jeremy Harrell with the Stones River Group. Finally, tonight's 4 candidates. They have all agreed to participate in the first ever gubernatorial forum to be held in Jackson, Tennessee. Thank all of you for being here.
Please welcome our moderator for tonight's forum, Kelly McAllister.
Good evening. I'm honored to serve as moderator tonight. Let's begin by reviewing the rules for tonight's forum, to which all of the candidates have agreed. Once the live broadcast begins, we will go through these one more time. There will be no opening or closing remarks. Candidates will not answer every question, but will be given an opportunity to answer an equal number of questions. Candidates will be allowed 45 seconds to respond to questions. Candidates are not allowed to reference or otherwise address one another. The audience should refrain from applauding, cheering, or in any other way participating in tonight's forum, except as we introduce and welcome our candidates, which we are going to do right now. Please help me welcome State House Minority Leader Craig Fitzhugh. Former Economic and Community Development Commissioner Randy Boyd. Businessman Bill Lee. And former Nashville Mayor Karl Dean. Candidates, thank you for participating tonight.
Thank you.
Tonight's forum is focused on issues of concern in rural areas of Tennessee, but in reality, these issues also affect almost every part of our state. We are excited that you gentlemen have agreed to join us tonight. As a reminder, please silence your cell phones. Gentlemen, that goes for you too if you have them. Also, flash photography is strictly prohibited. However, we do have a few minutes, so right now is your last chance to take a picture of these gentlemen on stage if you'd like to do so.
Tonight, candidates for Tennessee governor discuss the important issues concerning rural areas of the state. Live from the campus of Lane College in Jackson, Tennessee, this is the Rural Tennessee Gubernatorial Forum. Now, your moderator, Kelly McAllister.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Kelly McAllister, and I am honored to moderate tonight's first ever televised gubernatorial forum from Jackson. We'll introduce you to our candidates in just a moment, but first, a word about our partners who have made tonight possible.
Good evening. My name is Michael Anastasi. I'm Vice President of News for the USA Today Network, Tennessee. Thank you for joining us tonight here on the campus, the beautiful campus, Lane College in Jackson, Tennessee, for the Rural Tennessee Gubernatorial Forum. Together with our partners, WBBJ, the Jackson Chamber, the Jackson Energy Authority, Lane College, and Leadership Tennessee, the USA Today Network Tennessee and the Jackson Sun are delighted to bring you this discussion that will focus exclusively on the unique issues and concerns of rural and small-town residents, not just here in West Tennessee, but throughout our great state. Thank you, candidates, for being here tonight, and we hope this evening will help you and guide you in your decision on who to support to be our next governor.
Thank you, Michael. Before we meet our candidates, let's review the rules of tonight's forum. All candidates and campaigns have agreed to abide by these rules. There will be no opening or closing statements. Candidates will not answer every question, but will be given an opportunity to answer an equal number of questions. The order of the candidates on stage and the order in which candidates answer questions have been predetermined by random drawing. Candidates will be allowed 45 seconds to answer each question. Candidates are not allowed to reference or otherwise address one another. In the event that one candidate is referenced by another, the referenced candidate will be granted an additional 30 seconds to speak. The audience should refrain from applauding, cheering, or in any other way participating in tonight's forum, except for right now, as we welcome our candidates. State House Minority Leader Craig Fitzhugh. Former Economic and Community Development Commissioner, Randy Boyd. Businessman, Bill Lee. And former Nashville Mayor, Karl Dean. Welcome, gentlemen. Are you ready? All right, let's get right to our first question. Our first question tonight will be for all of the candidates. As governor, what will be your top priorities for the state, and how will those affect rural Tennessee? Mr. Fitzhugh.
Thank you. It's great to be here. My top priority when I'm elected governor is to expand Medicaid in Tennessee. I think it will help tremendously our entire state, but for rural East, West, and Middle Tennessee, it will put health care where it should be, back with hospitals staying open and more people being able to have their own health care. Secondly, I will, in this part of the state, if the mega site is not finished, finish it and put a tenant there that we can all be proud of and that can grow jobs for us here in West Tennessee.
Mr. Lee.
I am a businessman who runs an HVAC and plumbing and electrical business that employs 1,200 skilled tradespeople. And I'm also a cattle farmer of a fifth-generation farming operation, and I grew up in rural Tennessee. I faced a great tragedy in my life that God used in a real powerful way to shape who I am and why it is that I'm running for governor. And as governor, my wife and I have traveled to 95 counties in 95 days in an RV, and we found that no matter where we travel, people want a good job, a good school for their kid, and a safe neighborhood. As governor, those will be the things that are most important to me because I believe that they're most important to every Tennessean.
Thank you. Mr. Dean.
My priorities would be, number one, public education, which I think is the issue that will transform our state more than anything else. I think that has to be our priority, and we have to keep it that way until we are making sure that every child in Tennessee can succeed. I want to also work on health care. I agree that we need to expand Medicaid, that we need to bring an end to the closures of hospitals in Tennessee. We need to bring an end to poor people and people with disabilities not having access to health care. And then I would work hard on jobs all over the state. I want to be governor because I think the state wants a practical, common-sense, experienced person who's worked in government and can get things done.
Mr. Boyd.
So first off, I just want to thank the sponsors for hosting us tonight, and also want to thank Lane College. It's such a special place. It's done so much for so many people for so many years, and I'm particularly excited about the leadership of President Logan Hampton and what the future of Lane College is going to do for Jackson and all West Tennessee. So it's just a special place to be here tonight. I'm a seventh-generation Tennessean. The first 6 generations are from West Tennessee, from a little town of Fruitvale in Crockett County up to a little town of Kenton in Obion County. So we know rural West Tennessee very well in our family. My objective is to make Tennessee the state of opportunity, opportunity for better education, opportunity for better jobs, and opportunity for everyone. When we speak about opportunity for everyone, it's about helping our rural communities. We have many rural communities across our state that are getting left behind, and I believe we're only as rich as our poorest neighbor, and we're going to make sure that we all succeed together.
Thank you. Our second question will also be for all of our candidates. The major cities and their suburbs seem to be booming, while many of the rural areas of our state are often viewed as struggling. Do you believe there is an urban-rural divide? And what do you think it means for the future of Tennessee? Mr. Lee.
You know, our cities, our major cities are doing well, but our rural communities are struggling. In fact, we have 19 counties in rural Tennessee that are designated as poverty counties, distressed counties. 5 years ago, we had 18 of those. What happens in rural Tennessee profoundly affects what happens to every Tennessean, all across Tennessee. Whether you live in the middle of urban Nashville, what happens in rural Tennessee matters. It's why almost a year ago, we put out in our campaign something called the Roadmap for Rural Tennessee, talking specifically about this problem that I'm deeply concerned about and believe the next governor will have to be dedicated to changing.
Thank you. Mr. Dean.
Well, I like to think as Tennesseans that we're all in this together. And certainly I think there are disparities between urban areas and rural areas. But let's not forget there's poverty in urban areas and there are struggles in urban areas too. But the issues that I'm talking about, education, health care, jobs, resonate in both urban and rural Tennessee. Health care is particularly important to rural Tennessee because that's where the hospital closures are occurring. How hard is it to attract business when you have no hospital? We need to be sure in terms of education that we're facing disparities in funding, and that affects rural Tennessee. And jobs, something that I worked on very hard as mayor. Jobs is certainly an issue in rural Tennessee. So it's the same message, but I want to make sure rural Tennessee is included.
Thank you. Mr. Boyd.
So as Commissioner of Economic and Community Development a few years ago, I traveled to all 95 counties, and the answer to the question is absolutely. We have a great disparity across our state. As was referenced, when I started, there were 19 distressed counties across our state. Distress means you're in the bottom 10% in the entire United States in poverty, income, and unemployment. I put together something called the Governor's Rural Task Force, 120 people from all across the state that came together to create strategies around better education, around entrepreneurship, around industrial sites, around healthcare, around agriculture, and around tourism. We created a series of initiatives. Last year, some of those initiatives finally started taking hold. I've got great news. As of last week, we've gone from 19 distressed counties to 15. We've reduced it by 25%. As governor, we're going to keep going until we have 0 distressed counties.
Thank you. Mr. Fitzhugh.
Thanks. Well, I'll admit my bias here because all my life, except for the 4 years I was in the Air Force, I lived right here in West Tennessee, about 46 miles to the west. So I do believe there's a disparity, but I believe that there is no reason why we shouldn't even those playing fields. You know, I'm not too much worried about those in the skyscrapers. They're going to do just fine. It's those in the shadow of the skyscrapers that I worry about. And sometimes, as we all know, we all do better if we all do better. If we can give a helping hand, not a handout, but a hand up to folks through broadband, through more job training, through better education, through better roads, we can give rural areas the opportunity to survive and, yes, thrive in the 21st century.
Thank you, gentlemen. Our next question will be for Mr. Dean, Mr. Boyd, and Mr. Fitzhugh. Tennessee has made significant gains in education over the past 8 years, becoming the fastest improving state in the nation. What will you do to ensure we maintain and improve upon the gains we've made, particularly in rural communities? Mr. Dean.
I think the key thing for us to do is to recognize that education has to be our top priority. And that means I think we need to pay our teachers better. I think we're losing teachers, particularly in rural areas. When you get a teacher that you want in advanced science or advanced math, often those teachers are lost to another district for $10,000 more. We're losing teachers to other states. We need to make sure that funding across the state, particularly in rural areas, is fair. You know, one of the things that folks need to understand is that lots of rural areas do not have the sales tax revenue that urban areas have. And so they're much less able to give supplements into their education programming. But the commitment to education has to be both rural and urban, but there are special needs in the rural areas that we will address.
Mr. Boyd.
So it was my passion for education that led me to running for governor in the first place. And my passion for rural communities means we have to start there with education. When I talked about the opportunity for education, it means completing something that we call the Drive to 55, a term I coined 4 years ago. 55% of our population needs some post-secondary certificate or degree by the year 2025. We're at 39% today, but we're much lower in many of our rural communities. I agree with the mayor that we have to make sure that we're rewarding our superstar teachers and superstar principals like superstars. We need to open up the funding formula and revisit it so that we have more equity across the rural and the urban communities. Another big thing that I feel like we need to do is make sure that we're providing more career and technical education in our high schools so kids can actually graduate from high school ready to take a great job.
Mr. Fitzhugh.
Well, I'm a public education guy. My wife and I both were educated in the public schools, as were our children, as were all the grandchildren that I've got that are old enough to go to school. So I'm a believer in public education. I'm also becoming a believer more and more in early childhood education, pre-K, and the fact that we need to teach our children to read by the time they're in the third grade, read at third grade level, because it opens up a whole new world for children. And then on the other end of the spectrum, in our close to post-secondary, we need to make sure that a child has an opportunity to go to a four-year college if he or she wants to and thinks they want to, or a two-year college, but at least everybody needs some post-secondary training, such as technical training, because we've got jobs in this area and in other areas of Tennessee that you can make a good living for if we have the training that we need.
Right. Sticking with education, our next question is for Mr. Boyd, Mr. Lee, and Mr. Dean. Recognizing that what works for metropolitan school districts may not work for rural school districts, what strategies will you employ to provide equal access to high-quality education to all Tennesseans? Mr. Boyd.
Thank you. First off, it starts with great teaching. One of the things that was already pointed out that some of our rural communities aren't able to attract the same type of rural educators that other urban areas and more wealthy areas do. In South Carolina, they do something where they provide a tuition reimbursement for great teachers that will go to rural communities. It's an area in which I want to look at to be able to recruit more of our and retain more of our rural teachers in our rural communities. But also one of the things I think that's missing in a lot of our rural communities is access to that post-secondary education. I was proud a few years ago to create something called the Tennessee Promise that makes technical college and community college free of charge for so many students across the state. But if you live in Johnson County, if you live in Lake County, and so many of our rural counties, there's no technical school anywhere there. I want to put a technical campus on every high school in our state.
Mr. Lee.
You know, my children were homeschooled, public schooled, private school, and I mentor a young man in the inner city that's in a private charter. So I don't think it's as important what kind of school a kid goes to, is that we have high-quality education all across the state, especially in our rural communities. And I want to address something I think that might be particularly valuable to rural communities, and that is the fact that we've left out vocational, technical, and agricultural education for decades. I'm a guy who employs hundreds of skilled tradespeople, many of which didn't go to college. And we have 4 out of 10 kids in our state that don't go to college. And we don't do much to create a career path for them. The problem was so bad that we created a school of our own, and we have trained 1,000 in the skilled trades in the last 10 years in my company. That will be a priority for me for rural Tennessee education going forward.
Mr. Dean.
Yes, I've mentioned teacher pay, and I mentioned opening up the idea of looking at disparities in funding around the state. But I think another key issue for rural Tennessee is access to broadband. When you think about education and sending our children out into the world and off to college and off to work, and if they did not have access to broadband, if they did not have regular access to internet services, then it's like sending them off with both arms tied behind their backs. And the fact is, we've moved too slow in Tennessee on rural broadband. We need to speed that up and get that done, and that, to me, would be a very high priority. I am also very interested in seeing us have really quality vocational and technical programs, and I would work hard to make those available to all students in rural Tennessee.
Our next question will be answered by all candidates. What do you think are the biggest issues facing rural areas, and what is your plan to address them? Mr. Fitzhugh.
Thank you. Well, I think they're the same issues that affect our state as a whole. I think the number one most pressing issue is that health care and the fact that we have more hospitals closing per capita than any other state in this country, and we need to keep that from continuing to happen, especially in our rural areas. Secondly, it's education, and we've talked about before, but it is the basis for everything we do. Everything we get done is based on the best education we can provide our children. And then the third thing is jobs and infrastructure. Not just, we have low unemployment in this state right now. Our unemployment rate is good, but we have more people than in the entire country that are working at minimum wage. So we need better jobs and better infrastructure.
Mr. Lee.
I spoke earlier about wherever you live, people want a good job and a good school for their kid in a safe neighborhood. Education is critical. I've talked a little bit about my heart for education in rural Tennessee, particularly vocational and technical education, that will create a skilled workforce that will actually attract jobs and present the ability to create businesses in those small communities. But there also is, even though in our urban centers we have the biggest challenges with safe neighborhoods, we have an opioid epidemic that is ravaging rural Tennessee. I have a personal experience with that because I have a family member who actually died of an overdose. It cuts across all aspects of our society. We have to address that in order to create safe neighborhoods and a future for those who are living in our rural communities in particular.
Mr. Dean.
I mentioned that education, healthcare, and jobs are the priorities that I think would work both rurally and in more urban areas. But I think another important area that we need to be concerned about is the need to confront the challenge of keeping our youth in rural areas. If you look at West Tennessee, I think 15 out of 21 counties in the census of the last 6 years, from 2010 to 16, shows 15 counties have lost populations. And so to create that hope, to create that future is a key thing we can do for our youth. And that means investing in education. It means answering the health care problem. And it means creating jobs, and I mean good jobs that will keep these young people in their cities and towns.
Mr. Boyd.
So in the Governor's Rural Task Force, we often talked about a rural renaissance, and we believe Tennessee can lead the country in a rural renaissance. And how we do that starts with education. I mentioned the drive to 55. Companies look for an educated workforce. If you go to Lake County, the post-secondary attainment level is 8%. They don't have a technical school there. We've got to invest in education first and foremost if we're going to have any success at all. Second, we've got to bring jobs there. Unfortunately, many of our rural communities don't have sites for companies to move to. One of the task force initiatives was investing in sites so companies could actually locate there. And then I agree with Speaker Fitzhugh that we have to, Representative Fitzhugh, that we also have to make sure that we invest in health care. No company is going to move to a community that doesn't have good health care. Nobody's going to continue to live there if we don't fix that.
Our next question is for Mr. Lee, Mr. Boyd, and Mr. Fitzhugh. 19 or 15 of Tennessee's counties, all of them rural, rank among the top 10% of the most economically distressed counties in the country. That means that they have comparatively low per capita income, high unemployment, and high poverty rates. We know that economic factors are directly related to educational attainment. How can we ensure educational outcome success in our most economically stressed counties? Mr. Lee.
I've talked a little bit about the need for vocational education, and I actually don't think that building vocational schools is the answer so much as, because I don't think more government and more government spending is as valuable to taxpayers nor as effective as engaging with the private sector. Companies like mine who actually partnered with a public high school or who engage in post-secondary education, like this trade school that we created for certificate attainment. It's critical in those areas. We also talked about, agriculture is a critically important part of these rural communities. Today I visited the Dyer County High School FFA program. They have a remarkable program there that is challenging children to stay in those communities, to invest in agricultural education. It's 13% of our economy, and it deserves much more attention than we've given it on the education side.
Mr. Boyd.
So I've been to all 15 and 19 distressed counties, and each county has its own unique situations. I can speak to Hancock County, which as of last year was the 95th poorest county in our state. They don't have any technical education. They struggle to get teachers there. We need to provide programs that will incentivize teachers to come to rural counties like Hancock County. But I'd have to beg to differ. There's not an industry in Hancock County. There's no one there that can step up and create the educational programs for those young people. I think there is a role for the state when it comes to education. And I think there we need to step up and provide them the extra resources to be able to train their people so they can attract the companies that want to come there. We actually just got a call center to move into Hancock County last year to bring 200 new jobs. We've got to start.
Mr. Fitzhugh.
Thanks. I've not only visited these counties, I live in these counties. This is my home in rural West Tennessee, and much the same as rural Middle and rural East Tennessee. Our people are just as good and just as strong as people anywhere in this state. But sometimes when you look at the tax base, you look at the opportunities, they're just not there. And we should not let poverty and that type of thing get in our way. We need to do everything we can to give them the best education system. We need to pay our teachers more. We need to train them better. We need to appreciate them more. We also need to open up accessible and affordable education. We have, the University of Tennessee at Martin has centers all across West Tennessee where kids can actually receive a 4-year degree without leaving home. These are the kind of things we have to work toward in our rural areas.
As part of our forum tonight, we've added a few questions to help our audience get to know each of you as individuals. These are questions designed to be answered in a single word or phrase. Our first rapid-fire question. You've all been traveling the state for months now. Jealous of your travels, we all want to take a Tennessee road trip too. So where do we go, and what do we do? Mr. Boyd.
Well, you eat a lot of barbecue and you meet a lot of fascinating people.
Mr. Dean.
Well, I think you get an appreciation for the beauty of the state, its geographical diversity, and all the beautiful natural space we have here.
Mr. Lee.
You buy a 13-year-old RV, you wrap it up nice, you ask your wife to hop on board, and you go to 95 counties in 95 days.
That's quite a challenge. Mr. Fitzhugh.
Well, God put us in a great spot here, and what I do is I get on my favorite highway, Interstate 40, take off and drive for a while, turn left, get back on, drive for a while, and turn right. You'll find something that you didn't know was there, I guarantee you.
One more rapid-fire question for you, gentlemen. What is your favorite Tennessee product? Mr. Lee.
Moon pies.
Mr. Dean.
Goo clusters.
Mr. Boyd.
It'd be self-serving to say pet safe pet products, but I'm going to go with that. Always be closing.
And Mr. Fitzhugh.
Oh, you got me on this one. Please believe me, it's not because I drink it, it's just because it's famous. I like the Jack Daniel that goes across it.
Oh, yeah.
All right, well, some folks are going to head to the store, I'm afraid. Well, let's get back to the issues now. The next question is for all of our candidates. Rural areas of our state often have limited access to libraries. The Governor's Books from Birth Foundation, a program supported by our last two governors, one Democrat, one Republican, has been included as reoccurring funding in the state budget. The program delivers age-appropriate books directly to the mailboxes of children across Tennessee. As governor, will you continue to fund this program? And if so, are there things you would do to expand the program? Mr. Dean.
Yes, I would certainly continue to fund the program, and libraries are something I'm very passionate about. Probably the thing I'm proudest of as mayor was working on a program called Limitless Libraries, where we broke down the walls between public libraries and school libraries, made all the books in our school libraries and in our public libraries available to students. So if a student wanted a book from our public library, they could just order it and it's there the next day. So I would like to see innovative ways to encourage reading, to broaden the services of libraries around the state, and to see libraries grow and thrive all over the state. They are such a key part of making a successful community.
Mr. Boyd.
So I'm passionate about Books from Birth and the Imagination Library. In fact, my wife and I, Jenny, have been donating to it personally for the last 7 or 8 years at least. So it's something that we're personally committed to. As governor, we'll definitely be committed to continuing to expand it. In fact, the key measure that we look at across the state is third grade reading level, but we cut off Books from Birth when they enter kindergarten. I want to take Books from Birth to third grade. If we're wanting to make sure there's successful readers in third grade, I think we should expand it to third grade. And with regards to our libraries, I think it's important not only do they have access to the books, but they have access to broadband. And one of the important initiatives that's been touched on, we've got to make sure that our libraries throughout the state and all of our rural communities have access to broadband.
Mr. Fitzhugh.
Well, my wife asked me, what are you going to do about the Books from Birth? I said, I'm going to continue it. You know, it doesn't have to stop. It's been through 2 governors already, and we will continue it, no question. The 2 things that I would like to see better about it, one is to expand it. I think Randy was exactly right about that. And number 2, the post office, if you misdeliver these things, they won't let you have them back to redeliver them. It costs us a lot of money, and we've been trying to get the post office to change their plan, and I'll work on that.
Mr. Lee.
Absolutely, I would continue that program. Literacy is one of the most important foundational components of education that there is. And just in my business, we know if you don't build on a good foundation, you're not gonna have a good result. And that's true with children. I actually would like to expand it, but the way I would like to expand it is actually by partnering with nonprofits. I'm a strong believer that the nonprofit community, our faith-based community, our churches, our community organizations are an underutilized, underengaged resource that we should use in a much greater way. And there are organizations across this state. In fact, I've talked about, as governor, I'll create an office of faith-based initiatives and community nonprofit organizations to actually create an opportunity to engage with those organizations to enhance things just like Books from Birth.
Thank you. Our next question is for Mr. Boyd, Mr. Lee, and Mr. Dean. How will you prioritize education funding for distressed and rural counties? There has been a long-standing debate about how we equitably fund local education agencies in Tennessee. Do you think the basic education program needs to be redone? And if so, how would you treat rural and distressed counties? Mr. Boyd.
Thank you. So I've been to all 95 counties. I've talked to educators in every single county, leaders in every single county. And the interesting thing is, I haven't been to a single county where someone told me, you know, that BEP formula is working great for our community. So surely we can come up with a formula that at least somebody likes. So on day one, we're going to put together a task force and revisit the formula. And I think we need to look at a whole host of things. We need to look at making sure that we're adequately funding our rural communities. We need to look at making sure that we're providing quality, effective pre-K where we need to. We also need to look at our school resource officers in some of our communities that can't afford them and make sure that we're providing the resources to make sure our children are safe. But absolutely, we need to look at the formula again and come up with ways in which it's more equitable for everyone, our rural communities and our inner cities.
Mr. Lee.
You know, one of the greatest challenges that a governor faces is managing a budget, certainly. As a business person, I know that. I run a company that's about a $250 million budget in a low-margin industry, and managing that budget and finding the difference between those things that you need and those things that you want, it's critical in business. It's also critical in government. And education funding is one of those things that we need. There's no doubt about it. So we have to manage the resources, certainly look at redoing the BEP formula. Randy said it, it's true, no one's happy with it. In business, if one section of your company is struggling, you put the resources of senior management there. We certainly should do that in rural Tennessee where our education funding is struggling.
Mr. Dean.
Funding to me has always been a matter of priorities. When I was mayor, my first term, I led the city through the Great Recession, I led the city through a great flood, and we had severe economic tests. And I had to make cuts in a lot of departments to balance the budget. but I would not cut education, and I would not cut public safety, and I wouldn't stop working on creating jobs. And that was a hard thing to do. And then when we got to the boom years, and really in my second term, we were able to do more. We increased education by 37%. We did over $600 million in capital programs and moved starting teacher pay in Nashville from 30th in the state to 3rd. You've got to make education a priority. You've got to be serious about it, and that's got to guide your budget making.
Thank you. Our next question tonight is for Mr. Fitzhugh, Mr. Dean, and Mr. Boyd. Our host campus, Lane College, has the highest percentage of Pell-eligible students in the state of Tennessee. While education continues to be a primary driver of economic mobility, low-income students face financial barriers that restrict their ability to attain post-secondary credentials, certifications, and degrees. In addition to the Tennessee Promise and Tennessee Reconnect, what are your plans to assist low-income students in financing their training and education after high school? Mr. Fitzhugh.
Thanks, and it's an important discussion to have, especially amongst HBCUs such as Lane, and we're so proud to have them here in West Tennessee. We need to work on things like internships, apprenticeships, where students can learn and earn at the same time. We now have Pell Grants that are available in the summertime, so we can cut down on the amount of time that a student spends in that 4-year stretch, so we can get them graduated and get that education and get them to the job field a lot stronger. And then we can continue on the state level, not just the federal level, but the state level, to incent those students to stay in rural West Tennessee with some tuition, with some loan guarantees, with some reductions of loans if they do a certain skill for a certain period of time.
Mr. Dean.
Well, I certainly think that the Tennessee Promise has been a very good thing for the state. I applaud Governor Haslam on that. Nashville, when I was mayor, we did it the year before, and I think it's an excellent program. I do think I would like to see us restore money to the Hope Scholarships, where those $500 would be restored so that young people can go to 4-year colleges and have that help, and that would also help colleges all around our states, and particularly colleges that are in more rural areas and that are smaller. I think that is absolutely important. And as we move forward, we need to look for more and more creative ways where we can actually do more with the 4-year degree, where the state can be helpful to make sure more students graduate.
Mr. Boyd.
So first off, I'd want to give them a head start in providing more dual enrollment. Today, you can only get 2 dual enrollment classes. It doesn't cost us much more to provide free and unlimited dual enrollment. Not that many kids can take that many more programs. But if we can provide more dual enrollment and give them a better head start, the more successful they'll be. We also have a scholarship called the TSAA that's for low-income students. We fund about 60% of the need. We need to fund 100%, and that money goes strictly to our lowest income students. And finally, back to the Tennessee Promise. If a student is having a difficulty being able to afford school, they can go do a 2+2. You can go 2 years to a community college, get those 2 years for free, and then transfer to most of our universities across our state. So it's like a 50% off sell. And we need more students to be able to take advantage of that transfer process.
Our next question is for Mr. Lee, Mr. Dean, and Mr. Fitzhugh. What do you believe is the primary driver for economic development in rural communities? And what specific approach will you take in rural economic development? Mr. Lee.
Workforce development. Our company, I reference our company a lot, but it's an important piece in understanding economic development in communities is how companies work. Our company was chosen last year by the Tennessean as the best large company to work for in Nashville. That's the 3rd time that received that designation. And that came from employee surveys. Yet, we are an employer of skilled trades. We can't fill the jobs that we have available. The best company in town can't get people to fill those jobs because our educational system has ignored the trades and that component for so long. Workforce development will create business and attract business to rural community, and we have to do it.
Mr. Dean.
Well, I think there are a series of things that have to happen. You not only need to have workforce development, but to get there, you need to have quality education, which we've talked about. You need to invest in infrastructure, and you need to have a good healthcare system. You know, it's all about being an attractive area that's going to keep people living there, attract people to move there, and attract people to invest there. So you have to first work on schools, you have to work on the infrastructure that is available, including broadband, and then you have to make sure that the hospitals can stay open and hospitals can provide health care. Again, just think about this hospital situation where we have these hospitals closing. How hard is it to lure a company to move into an area when there's no hospital? It is a huge challenge.
Mr. Fitzhugh.
Well, you think about it, and it is. It's those three things that I mentioned first. It's education, a comprehensive and integrated education system. It's health care. It's affordable and accessible health care for the quality of life that you have when you bring people to live in your community. And then it's infrastructure. It's broadband. It's highways. It's the ability to move things around, both in your mind and on the road. So those are the drivers that make our economy in East, West, Middle, rural Tennessee, or in our cities go. They're the same. You just have to play them a little different to make sure they're right for the area that you have.
Our next question will be answered by all of our candidates. The state of Tennessee has invested millions of dollars in the Memphis Regional Megasite. What is your vision and plan for the megasite, and are you committed to recruiting a major facility for that site? Mr. Dean.
Well, the first thing I would do as governor would be to hire somebody to work as a rural economic development advisor in my office, somebody who would get up every morning thinking about rural economic development and would go to bed at night thinking about it. And I am supportive of the megasite. We mentioned the statistics about we have 15 out of 21 counties in West Tennessee where they're losing population. You have many distressed counties, and that's motivation enough to do this project. I would support this project by finding the appropriate funding to get it done and to look for a suitable project to go there. I would also include local government, keep people informed, and have no more surprises about what's going on that project.
Mr. Boyd.
Yes, so first off, I want to make a comment that I did actually have an assistant commissioner for rural development in economic development that was totally focused on that 24/7 with a great team that has done a great job, and some of that success we mentioned earlier goes to that team, and I credit them. The commitment is to finish the site. We've got a couple of projects left to do. We've got my 100% commitment on day one. It'll be the top thing on my budget to finish the site. Second, job one is to land a major mega site or major company on the mega site. If we populate that site, we've done the calculations, we can generate 11,000 direct jobs, 14,000 indirect jobs, and another 10,000 induced jobs, 35,000 jobs, and a $7 billion a year annual impact. We have to do that. Know that the site is ready now. We don't have to wait to finish the site before we can start selling it. When Nissan landed in the middle of the state, we didn't even own the land. We don't need to wait. As soon as I'm elected, we're going to start selling on day one.
Mr. Fitzhugh.
If you elect me, I'll be your rural economic developer. and I'll do everything I can to finish that mega site, which frankly has languished for far, far too long. And people have, the glow has worn off it a little. We need to polish it and we need to get it done. And we need to put an industry there that will not only populate that site, but will put out those rays where in a radius of 50 or 60 miles will give economic vitality to those communities that we need to revitalize so well. It can be done, it will be done, and it's really a great site. Site selectors tell us all the time that it's one of the best they've ever seen. It will happen, it's going to happen, and it'll be a first priority for me.
Mr. Lee.
I think if one word comes to mind for me about that particular project, it's disappointing. It's a project that is 10 years old, wasn't ready. We lost a major tenant because it wasn't ready. And, in the private sector, we just did a 45-story building in downtown Nashville, $170 million project. We know exactly what day that job's going to start and exactly what day it's going to finish and when tenants are going to be in there, because you have to do that in the private sector. And we need to approach government projects in the same way. We absolutely need to finish that project. It will be a great site. It will get a great tenant. We need to finish it, spend the money to do that, and that would be a priority of mine going forward.
Our next question is for Mr. Boyd, Mr. Fitzhugh, and Mr. Lee. In early March of this year, President Trump's announcement of a 25% tariff on steel and a 10% tariff on aluminum imports reportedly caused at least one rural Tennessee employer to put the brakes on industrial expansion. What are your thoughts on the president's efforts to impose tariffs like these? Mr. Boyd.
I want to come back to the last question to just mention for everybody in West Tennessee that's hoping for the mega site to be finished and land that big mega site. We had to stay the course. It took Chattanooga 17 years to land a Volkswagen in Chattanooga. These things take time, but we can do it, and I don't believe that the glow is worn off one bit. I'm excited about the project where it is, and we're ready to sell now. With regards to the tariffs, so I believe in free and fair trade. In some cases, it's not fair, and we need to address those things, but as governor, I'm going to fight for Tennessee jobs. I was with a farmer in Halls last night that grows soybeans. He says 4 out of every 10 bushels that he sells are going to go to China, and he's not going to be able to sell those now, and he's worried about the jobs that he's going to lose. Farmers all across West Tennessee are worried about these tariffs, and as a governor, I'm going to fight for Tennessee jobs.
Mr. Fitzhugh.
Well, you know, sometimes you get thrown a curveball and you just have to do the best you can to hit it. It wasn't anything we did to cause these tariffs, but we have to work through them. I don't think they're the best thing, but if I have an expertise, it's what I've been doing for 24 years. It's state government, and I think we can do some things at the state level to soften those blows. We have to give incentives. The rest of the country's giving incentives, and I want to give incentives to those businesses who are trying and meet these unexpected roadblocks. So there's ways we can help in the state of Tennessee, both with our agricultural community for those soybeans that were discussed. I mean, we're pretty close, ladies and gentlemen, on a medical marijuana, which could be, if it happens, it could be a legal cash crop for many farmers around here. So we have to think about things like that.
Mr. Lee.
I believe strongly in free trade. I think that there are times when you have trade deals, and those deals have to be good for us. And I'm hopeful that the president is in the middle of trying to create a deal and hopeful for the outcome of that. But I'm very concerned about what those tariffs mean to Tennesseans, and particularly to agricultural Tennesseans. I'm a livestock producer in the beef cattle business. We do not export our products, but I'm very connected to that industry. We have 67,000 farmers in this state, 13% of our economy. It's critical that we protect those jobs. I'm very concerned about what those tariffs might mean, and very interested in making certain that those jobs are not negatively affected here.
The next question is for Mr. Fitzhugh, Mr. Lee, and Mr. Dean. What is the biggest threat to Tennessee's economic prosperity and security? Mr. Fitzhugh.
You know, our biggest threat is that we just sit on our laurels, because really we're doing pretty well. But we have to, you know, growth is everything. And we have to grow our education system, we have to grow our infrastructure, we have to grow our healthcare system. That doesn't necessarily mean get it bigger, but it has to be ready for the 21st century. We've got great fundamentals in this state: low debt, lowest taxes in the country. As I said, the good Lord put us in a perfect spot to be the spoke of the South. So we're there. It's ours for the taking. We just don't need to slow down. We need to keep pressing forward for all our citizens.
Mr. Lee.
The biggest threat to financial prosperity in our state is government spending, over government spending, expanding a budget too rapidly. We're beneficiaries of good fiscal policy, low taxes, good budget management. And that is the biggest threat going forward. I think our nation has found itself in a really precarious situation. And I don't think we did that ever knowingly or intentionally. It was one small tax raise at a time, one small entitlement, one small government program, one small movement at a time, and suddenly we found ourselves underwater. Tennessee cannot do that. We have to be conservative fiscally going forward.
Mr. Dean.
Well, I think Tennessee has a lot of great things going for it. When I was mayor, I did a lot of economic development work, and talking about Tennessee, selling Tennessee, convincing people to invest in Tennessee. There was a lot to share, and I was very proud of the state. Actually, I think the biggest challenge the state faces is probably workforce development. There's a lot of things that are related to that, but I think workforce development is the one thing that could keep us from continuing to see good growth. We have had a lot of success in different parts of the state. with economic development and attracting new businesses to Tennessee. Part of that is the tax structure, part of that is the business-friendly nature of the state, but we've been able to find the workforce for it. And now as we continue to try to attract more businesses, it's going to be harder and harder to have that workforce. And so that's going to be an issue for Nashville and Chattanooga, and it's also going to be an issue for rural areas where having the workforce there is the key to their economic revival. And so that brings in that whole education equation. I also think that we shouldn't get too comfortable with the status quo. I mean, there are a lot of areas of the state that we need to improve on.
Let's take a moment for another rapid-fire question. You ready? Who or what has been the greatest influence on your life? Mr. Dean.
Well, my parents, obviously, but let me just add two teachers. My Miss O'Neill, who I had for English, who taught me to love literature, and Miss Aldridge, who gave me a love of geography and history, and all those things have stayed with me.
Mr. Lee.
My faith in Christ, that is the most important thing in my life and always will be, and it's walked me through the most darkest of days and given me the brightest hope in the best of days.
Mr. Fitzhugh.
Well, my mom, who I lost 4 years ago next week, my dad, my law partner, and my football coach in high school.
Mr. Boyd.
So I'd also go with my faith, but when I think about here on earth, unquestionably my wife of 33 years.
One more rapid-fire question for you. What book are you reading right now? Mr. Dean.
American Pastoral by Philip Roth.
Mr. Boyd.
I'm rereading Dreamland, something I read last year, but felt like it was a good time to do a refresher. It's about the opioid crisis.
Mr. Fitzhugh.
The book about Perry Wallace at Vanderbilt, I just picked it up and just started it. I should know the name.
Mr. Lee.
I'm reading a book daily called My Utmost for His Highest.
Our next question is for all of our candidates. In Jackson, we're blessed with great access to high-speed internet, but many of our surrounding and rural areas have, as many of you have mentioned, have extremely limited access, including speeds of less than 3 megabytes per second. Do you think broadband expansion is important? I know you do. And if so, how would you go about it? Mr. Lee.
You know, I live in rural Tennessee, and so I have a bit of a personal experience with that. We don't have broadband at my home. We don't have cell service either at my home, but we have, so we have a dish. So if there's a storm or it's really cloudy outside, we don't have internet access in our home. Now I can work around that, and my business is not located in my home. But because of that experience, I know how incredibly difficult it would be to operate a business, to even think about the idea of telemedicine for rural access to healthcare, to think about educating children with remote and distance learning. It's something that we not only, it's no option at all. We have to do it. With partnerships, with the private sector, the public utilities, we have to accomplish it.
Mr. Dean.
I think you do it by the state making a larger commitment to it and being more aggressive about the investment it makes, and then trying to build public-private partnerships to get it done. And I think we should be a high priority. We've gone, I think, way too slow on this. And you see the importance of it not only in education that's been mentioned, I think certainly in rural health care it's important, but when you talk about entrepreneurs and the futures of small towns, you know, a lot of people are at some point are going to want to get out of the density of a city and move to a smaller town. And they're going to bring new ideas and they're going to bring new investments. But it's going to be important that they have broadband and they have access to the internet to do that business. By not having this broadband, by not doing as much as we can, we're really limiting what entrepreneurs can do in our state.
Mr. Boyd.
When I was commissioner and traveled all across the state, holding town hall meetings, usually somewhere between 50% to 80% of the conversation was about how do we get broadband to our communities. So we launched a study, took us over a year looking at different solutions. It's online, you can check on the ECD website about broadband. It defines what is broadband, it defines who doesn't have it, and it shows that many of our rural communities are the ones that are most left behind. If you look at the state, 13% of the state supposedly doesn't have broadband, but it's closer to 60% in our rural communities. So we created an initiative that was passed last year. In this case, it wasn't a new government program, but it was getting government out of the way. Electric co-ops were prohibited from offering broadband. They reached 2.5 million Tennesseans across our state. We deregulated and let them offer broadband, and they're now rolling out broadband all across our state.
Mr. Fitzhugh.
Governor McWhorter had an equation for jobs. It said education plus roads equal jobs. I'd like to add a little of that, education plus roads plus broadband equal jobs. I think just as REA brought rural electricity into the rural areas, just as Bell Systems brought a telephone and communication into rural areas, broadband does so much more. As these gentlemen have talked about, it just makes it wide open, and it literally does level the playing field. I'm proud of our larger cities such as Memphis and the hub city here for what they've done and what they've got, and we know where it is, we just need to put it there. And we've done some at the state level, but just not enough because it's pretty expensive. And there may be some of those things where you have to lift up some folks to let them have that ability to put in broadband.
Our next question will be answered by Mr. Dean, Mr. Boyd, and Mr. Lee. Our state seal contains two words that are important to the economy of our state: agriculture and commerce. Clearly, much work is done in the state government to promote commerce. As governor, how would you propose to promote agriculture in our state, region, and nation? Mr. Dean.
Well, since I didn't have an opportunity to answer the question regarding a potential tariff war, I would say that is a matter of great concern. I mean, certainly if you read today's Tennessean, as I did, and you saw the concerns of farmers being stated, particularly as to it will affect their investments into the future. And perhaps stymie economic growth. So it's an area of real concern. I think programs like the Agricultural Enhancement Program, which allows farmers to actually give a return on a dollar invested by the state of about $4, are great programs. I think doing educational programs in the schools are absolutely key. I think we need to look at any government regulation to make sure it's common sense and isn't putting too much of a burden on farmers.
Mr. Boyd.
So as I have a farmers coalition, and when I talk to them, I'm struck by the fact that all farmers are small businesses just like my small business, and they're also frustrated with all the regulations that we put on them. So deregulating, making it easier for them just to do their business, I think is the first step. Second, I agree with Mayor Dean that the Ag Enhancement Fund is something that is critical to agriculture all across the state, and we need to continue to fund. But I also want to do something new. In economic development, we had something called a fast track fund where we'd invest in people and places to be able to attract industry. I want to create a farm track fund. It's based on something that we've had experience with. That's recruiting food processors to our state, like Devil Eye Mustard that we recruited a few years ago to Dyersburg. It's a company that is employing 200 people, but they're now also sourcing all their mustard seed from the local community. Bringing the customers to our farmers, I think, could be one of the best things we can do for them.
Mr. Lee.
I live on a cattle farm, as I've said, and my family's been multiple generations in the ag industry. We actually sell meat to farmers markets and restaurants. And there is an emerging food industry in this nation that is absolutely part of the future, and we have to invest in that in this state. Tennessee's positioned with the segment of our economy that's dedicated to agriculture. We're positioned to lead the nation in ag. There's an emerging agricultural technology industry that we need to invest in. It's a matter of focus. It's a matter of understanding that industry and being committed to it. Education-wise, we have a fourth of our resources in the state of Tennessee that our neighboring state of Georgia has committed to ag education. So it starts at education and it goes all the way through to innovation and transformation in economic development in ag.
The next question is for Mr. Boyd, Mr. Fitzhugh, and Mr. Dean. How will your administration prioritize transportation infrastructure projects? Mr. Boyd.
Well, it's critical all across our state, and we're going to make it a top priority to make sure that we're continuing to invest in infrastructure in roads, in bridges, and I'll come back to something we keep talking about, but in broadband, which is also a key part of our infrastructure. I think we need to continue to look at new solutions for infrastructure and investments. One of the things that I worry about is our current funding formula. The way we fund infrastructure, our roads in particular, is through a gas tax. But companies all across the country are coming up with more fuel-efficient ways to transport us. I know that Volkswagen plans on having 50% of their cars being non-fuel-based within the next 5 years. If that continues, the model that we have today will not continue to fund us. So we're going to have to come up with new innovative solutions to continue to fund our infrastructure.
Mr. Fitzhugh.
Well, I take a little different position, saying that I was supportive of the gas tax, the Improve Act last year that Governor Haslam proposed, and it would not have passed without my caucus's support. So it gives us the ability to make a plan now instead of just ad hoc when money comes along, and the federal government's not giving us the kind of money that they should and used to. So we have to have a good plan, and that plan includes the cities, of course, but it also includes the rural areas. You know, Governor McWhorter, again, he had a plan to have a 4-lane access from every county seat to the interstate highway. Not a bad idea, but it was in the 1986 road plan, and it never has been completed. So we've got a lot of work to do. We've got to keep our roads in repair, and then we need to look 21st century to travel that will make our state, with high-speed rail across the state, we need to start planning for that. We don't want to get behind.
Mr. Dean.
I think infrastructure investment is always essential. Once you stop investing in infrastructure, you're only going to have bigger bills down the road. It's absolutely key that we build the roads that we need, and I certainly believe that having the 4-lane access in counties, every county I've visited who has not had that yet, brings that up almost immediately as something that they want. I think the governor can play a key role, and the state can play a key role in leadership on regional transit issues. We're more and more confronted, whether you're in Middle Tennessee, West Tennessee, or East Tennessee, that there are metropolitan areas, and that this goes off and affects rural areas too, where traffic just stagnates. And the solutions to that cannot be done by one city, by one county. It's going to take a multi-county effort. And the state has to provide the leadership for that to get done, and I'd be, anxious to work on that.
The next question builds on the previous and is for Mr. Fitzhugh, Mr. Lee, and Mr. Boyd. There is a public perception in small communities that the state's focus on transportation and infrastructure is on urban and suburban areas. But rural areas have a need for high-quality infrastructure as well. For example, West Tennessee farmers need high-quality infrastructure in order to move their products from the farms to the rivers. How will your administration prioritize rural infrastructure needs? Mr. Fitzhugh.
Well, we have to remember that folks that live in Lauderdale County don't have the same tax base as folks in Knox County or Williamson County or Davidson County. So we might have to have a little of that hand up by our state government to keep our state going because, we all do better when we all do better. So I would understand and do understand the necessity for rural roads and infrastructure and to give them through grants and other things that may be competitive and they have skin in the game, but will allow us as rural communities to keep being viable.
Mr. Lee.
This is a little bit about the broader question of rural Tennessee and does it matter? It certainly does matter because it profoundly impacts the rest of our state if the economy does not work in rural Tennessee. Bridges, roads, existing infrastructure into all parts of the state are the arteries of economic development and prosperity, so they absolutely have to be maintained. I run a company that's in the business of maintaining infrastructure and buildings and facilities. Deferring maintenance is a terrible idea. We tell that to our customers all the time, and in state government, we have to remember that too. The priority for infrastructure funding is going to be to maintain those existing arteries of economic prosperity throughout every segment of the state.
Mr. Boyd.
So I've traveled all 95 counties again as a gubernatorial candidate, and one of my favorite questions is, so if I'm the next governor and I have unlimited power, don't correct me, Representative, I know that's not true, but for this exercise, and you have 3 wishes, and I could guarantee them to become true, what would they be? And in every case, in every single county across the state, it's always infrastructure, and in particular, our rural communities. We've got to make an investment in infrastructure to keep our rural communities sustainable and competitive. One of the things that we did with the Rural Economic Opportunity Act that the Governor's Rural Task Force passed last year was put together some funding for additional infrastructure. Since we're in West Tennessee, we'll highlight Lake County. Lake County has a great port of Kate's Landing, a great place to help attract businesses. They need some rail to make it viable, and it's a kind of project like that that we would want to make sure that we invest in.
We'll take a break now with another rapid-fire question. How do you stay healthy on the campaign trail? Mr. Lee.
It's been challenging, but I'm a guy who runs, bikes, and swims. And so if I can find a way to do one of those things wherever I'm traveling, I try to do that.
Mr. Fitzhugh.
I've not found that answer yet, but and I think I know what it is, but it's pretty tough. And I used to have a pretty good workout regimen, but I've not gotten back to it. But I will one day.
Mr. Boyd.
Well, I'm a runner, and so I wanted to see the state. I wanted to make sure that I continued my running regimen, and I wanted to have some quality time in each community. So I ran from Bristol to Memphis, 537.3 miles. Finished it last November, and no, I didn't wear a plaid shirt.
Mr. Dean.
I think it's hard to do for me on the road, but it's important when I get home to get exercise. I work out, and the hard part is you're in a car so much when you're driving all over the state, and you need to get the stretching and the lifting in to make you feel right.
Our next question is for Mr. Lee, Mr. Dean, and Mr. Fitzhugh. In recent years, rural access to hospitals has been severely curtailed as a result of hospital closures. Regardless of the cause, the closures limit access to quality health care in our rural communities. What will you do as governor to help ensure rural Tennesseans have access to quality health care in a local hospital? Mr. Lee.
I think the worst thing we can do is continue on in the same path that we are and watch rural hospitals fail. And the way that we change that is that we look at reforming the entire system. Our healthcare system is broken, in part because we don't know how to control costs. And our company insurance rates went up 29% 2 years ago and 19% last year. That's unsustainable. And that equates and translates into what happens in rural communities and rural hospitals is escalating cost and those hospitals' inability to deal with that. We have patients, payers, providers. At no point for any of three of those is there a real incentive driver to lower cost. We have to fundamentally approach the incentives in our healthcare system to change the outcomes going forward, and that'll change rural healthcare.
Mr. Dean.
Well, I think we do need to look at costs, and I do think we need to always think about preventative health. We shouldn't think about health until someone gets chronically ill. We should be thinking about that long before. But I do think what needs to happen is, number one, is Medicaid expansion. I'll just repeat that again. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. It was rejected. It's something Governor Haslam negotiated. It would have helped our state immeasurably. It would have helped rural areas immeasurably, and we turned that down. The next governor needs to do the expansion or get a fair share of Medicaid dollars for our state. It's that simple. We also need to think of creative ways of providing rural health care. There's telemedicine and other things, but we should look at different operations and do everything we can to make sure that we have hospitals and medical centers in rural areas all around the state.
Mr. Fitzhugh.
Last night on the floor of the House, I again asked and pleaded with my colleagues to please expand Medicaid. It will do more quicker than anything else. In my native county, in my birth county of Haywood, the successor hospital where I was born is closed. You talk to ambulance drivers, and the emergency room in Haywood County now is the back of an ambulance. That's just not right. We have to do whatever we can. Now, I know what hospitals do is different, but every community deserves the type of health care that is affordable and accessible, and we just can't let this epidemic of hospitals closures keep on.
Sticking with health care, our next question will be answered by Mr. Dean, Mr. Boyd, and Mr. Lee. Access to care in rural areas is about more than just hospitals. What can the state do to ensure that our poor or rural areas gain better access to preventative and primary health care? Mr. Dean.
Well, I want to commend Jackson. I know in Jackson, Tennessee, there is the health center here does fantastic work and also provides healthy alternatives for people to get exercise. That was one thing I cared a lot about when I was mayor. It's not just rural areas, it's urban areas too. As a state, we are generally unhealthy. If you look at major health indicators, whether it's diabetes, heart disease, low birth weights, women's health, we rank in the bottom 10. And so I think we really need a concerted effort in rural Tennessee and in urban Tennessee and in suburban Tennessee for us to think about preventive medicine, how we can get people more active, how we can eat better. That should be a major goal for our state, is to become one of the healthiest states in the country instead of one of the least healthy.
Mr. Boyd.
There's a lot to say here, but we'll just say a few things. So first, I think that the idea of expanding the Affordable Care Act that ship has sailed. We can't go. This Trump administration is not going to be providing that, but they have offered us block grants. It's something that our state needs to go and argue for and get the most money that we possibly can. That will allow Tennesseans to create policies for Tennesseans, and if we do that, I think that we will be able to provide policies and programs that will help our rural communities. But I think we're missing the point too often when we talk just about insurance. It's also about health and about reducing the cost of health care. My company's premiums last year went down 19%. We focused on a healthier workforce. We've been doing this for 8 years now. We need to encourage more healthier lifestyles across our state. And second, we need to be smarter consumers of health care, which I hope I can talk about in another question.
Mr. Lee.
We do need to lower costs, and the way we lower costs is we change the model of healthcare in rural communities. We deregulate. We change the certificate of need process so that we can have freestanding ERs. We expand the opportunities for scope of practice so that we can have more access to healthcare providers in those communities. 37 counties do not they have a shortage of primary care physicians. We need to create rural residencies and incentivize rural residencies. We need to change choices that people have for health care, including in coverage. We need to open up the individual market and create, in fact, a market and not one provider of payer. So we have to fundamentally change the system, and we have the brilliant minds in the healthcare industry in this state to do that.
Our next question is for all the candidates. Tennessee ranks in the bottom 10 states in the nation for many health metrics, as Mr. Dean just mentioned, including obesity, diabetes, depression, and infant mortality. How would your administration focus on improving our status on these key issues? Mr. Boyd.
So I think first to agree with the stats, we're 6th in the country in obesity, we're 8th in the country in smoking, and actually we're number 1 in the country in teenage obesity. I think there's 2 areas in which we can reach people, one through our employers and second through our schools. And so our employers can take the lead. And the good news is, as my company has been an example, doing the right things, providing new healthier programs. We have a nurse practitioner on staff. We have all types of programs that encourage a healthier lifestyle. We pay for smoking cessation. And we do this somewhat altruistically, but at the same time, it actually saves us money. We need to encourage more of our employers to exercise programs like this. And at the same time, we need to offer better programming for our schools. I'll stop with that.
Thank you. Mr. Fitzhugh.
Yes, I think we need to get back to the basics. We have to teach our children good habits, and hopefully some of those will carry on. We need to make sure that we have periods of exercise, that we do things that promote a good lifestyle. The problem of food deserts is just not in the urban areas, it's in the rural areas as well, where there are not fresh foods and fruits and vegetables available for children and adults to eat. So we need to work on those type of things. And we just need to do everything we can to positively promote. Our health department, they do a great job. They're in every county, and they help with that. But I think we can improve that, increase that, and in small and large counties throughout the state.
Mr. Lee.
It's a really important subject you bring up because 80% of the cost of health care is connected to primarily preventable and chronic disease. If we really want to change the healthcare system, then we have to attack this. We have to talk about health more than we talk about health care. And we can do that through education, and we certainly can do that with businesses. But I believe that one of the primary ways we can do that is, once again, engaging in the private sector and in the nonprofit community. I was the chairman of the YMCA, one of the largest Ys in the country. The YMCA of Middle Tennessee has the largest aftercare child program in the city for educating on these subjects. They also have obesity programs and diabetes programs. Engaging our nonprofit community in a more significant way with the help of a framework of a government can actually move this conversation of health.
Mr. Dean.
Well, this was an issue that I worked on as mayor. I was very concerned about childhood obesity and very concerned about our low rankings as a city and as a state on public health standards. And I felt I needed to use sort of the bully pulpit of the office to try to encourage people to walk and run. I don't know how many times we led walk 100 miles or run with the mayor efforts. but I thought that was important because people needed to start thinking about their health. One of the things I believe in is we need to make the healthy choice the easy choice, that we need to have access to parks, access to greenways, and that needs to occur in urban areas, it needs to occur in rural areas. We need to invest in our state parks, which are incredible assets to rural Tennessee. We need to protect them. We need to go back to the days when we had the best state parks in the country, and we do not need to privatize those parks. And when it comes to health, the status quo is not our friend. We need to do better. We should aspire to be the healthiest state in the country, and we need to get working on it soon.
Let's take a moment for another rapid-fire question, and you are on the record with your answer. Where do you think you can find the best barbecue in the state? Think about it. Mr. Fitzhugh.
Well, I'm going to stay with the 82nd District that I represent now, and it's Helen's in Brownsville.
All right, good answer. Mr. Boyd?
That's a difficult one because we have a great barbecue all over the state. So I think I'm going to go with my son's barbecue at his house.
I don't know about that.
That was a very safe answer.
Yeah.
Mr. Dean?
Well, I can't beat that for a safe answer. You know, there is such great barbecue all over our state. I guess I would, give a nod to Memphis and just say almost any barbecue place there would be fantastic.
All right. Mr. Lee?
Yeah, we actually have processed pigs. As part of we sell meat and chickens and pigs, so I'm going to have to go with my mom.
Another very safe answer, but a good one. Our next question is for Mr. Fitzhugh, Mr. Dean, and Mr. Boyd. Tennessee is one of the top 5 states in the nation for the number of opioid prescriptions written. And it is an issue that is plaguing rural communities in particular, as many of you have mentioned. This year, Governor Haslam proposed legislation to begin to address the opioid crisis in our state. Does this plan go far enough, and what other things need to be done to address this issue? Mr. Fitzhugh.
I too commend Governor Haslam for his plan, but I sort of count it like the Mississippi River. Mississippi River is really wide, so it's a wide plan. It covers a lot of things. But then in the summertime, the Rio Grande River, for instance, gets very, very, very shallow. So I don't think it's wide, but not too deep. It talks about the right things, but we're not putting enough resources into these. It's a total of about $30 million. There are hospitals in this country that put more than $30 million themselves into this problem. It's a great problem. It's going to get greater in rural areas, and we have to put more resources. We've passed some laws this year that I think will help, but we have to concentrate on this problem. It's solvable, it really is, but it's going to take resources to do it.
Mr. Dean.
Well, I think the key thing is treatment, in addition to empowering law enforcement to make sure that those who are providing these drugs, who are violating the law, are apprehended and punished. But I think one of the key things that's happened in Tennessee, and I hate to keep bringing up the subject, but part of this goes back to Medicaid expansion. We do not have the treatment centers that we need. And I think the treatment money that's in the governor's budget, although it is a good start, and I commend him for his general program, is not nearly enough. I visited Renewal House in Nashville recently, which really serves a huge area in Middle Tennessee that serves pregnant women who have been on opioids and mothers, and they have a waiting list of 60 people. We need more treatment centers. We need more access to Medicaid dollars to get things done in this issue.
Mr. Boyd.
So this is real and personal to me. I've been to every county in the state, and in every one I meet people that have been affected by this crisis. In Maryville, I met Jan McCoy, who lost her son Dane last year. I know Aaron in Campbell, who's somebody I've been working with for the last year. He lost his father last year. This is affecting all of our communities. Someone asked earlier about what the biggest threat is to our rural communities. I would like to say I think it's the opioid crisis. We have to stop it, and stop it immediately, and take bold action. About 6 months ago in September, I published a 10-point plan, but it's bucketed into 3 big areas. The first of which is we have to mobilize. We need to declare a state of emergency, mobilize all the state's resources around this issue, and put somebody in charge, a chief epidemic officer. Second, we've got to prevent. We've got to stop overprescribing, and we've got to educate people. And third, to the mayor's point, we've got to do a better job of recovery. Today, the #1 place people go for treatment is our jails. We've got to do better than that.
This question is for Mr. Lee, Mr. Boyd, and Mr. Fitzhugh, and addresses an issue that you've spoken to already. When students from rural communities graduate from college, they often decide against returning home because high-quality jobs are not available to them in their small communities. What can you do as governor to help rural communities attract and retain a younger, better-trained workforce? Mr. Lee.
I think that we've discussed the need for broadband. What we really have to do is create an environment where young people can thrive. Our mission statement at our company says that our job is, and I go into our new employee orientation meetings monthly and say to the people who are just coming to work here, my job as the head of this company is to create an environment where you can thrive. We've got to create that kind of an environment in our rural communities, and we do that by providing technology that allows for them, but we also do that by understanding that a job created in Tennessee is better than one attracted to Tennessee. So the desire, we want to attract jobs here, but we have to put an equal and creative emphasis and focus on building up and creating new businesses and new startup companies and bring young people into an environment where they see that as a possibility in rural communities.
Mr. Boyd.
So I'd like to point to a city just near here in Henderson in Chester County. They have a gig Main Street. You can go from kindergarten to a PhD on that street. I've got to know the businesses in that town. We've got companies that have actually moved from Silicon Valley to Henderson and Chester County in rural West Tennessee because they can have a better quality of life. Their kids can walk to school. You can drive to work in 5 minutes or less. And you can access the world because they have broadband, because they have a great quality of life. So we need to make investments to make sure that other communities can be like Henderson and Chester County. I believe that rural Tennessee does have that opportunity to have that kind of success, but we've got to help them with those basic infrastructure to make that happen.
Mr. Fitzhugh.
This is the key to the vitality of our small communities. I think we need to ask them what it would take for them to move. What do they want to see? And we want to give them the ability to stay here and not leave and have to come back. I mentioned the UTM centers. We have TCATs. We have community colleges, and we have a lot of those in rural areas. So we need to emphasize those, and we need to make sure that we have the broadband deployment, we have the downtowns that are viable or the areas that are viable. We need to keep our natural beauty natural and beautiful so that this will be a place in East, West, and Middle rural Tennessee where children will want to stay, will want to come back and raise their families.
This next question is for Mr. Dean, Mr. Fitzhugh, and Mr. Lee. Economic development has regional impact. How would you encourage counties and regions to work together to attract new business and industry? Mr. Dean.
I think regionalism is a key concept that we need to be talking about more. When I was mayor of Nashville, I learned about a system that was done in Colorado where the mayor of Denver invited all the mayors in the area to come together and form a mayor's caucus to work on regional issues. And so I did what anybody would do. I copied the idea, and I invited all the mayors around Middle Tennessee to come and meet and talk about issues of regional concern. And the issues are going to be things like transportation. They're going to be things like economic development. I do think that the state has a critical role to play here because there are limited powers of counties, and you need to be able to get things done across county lines. And the state needs to play a role in facilitating those conversations and having people think more broadly in terms of economics, transportation, water, and other issues.
Mr. Fitzhugh.
Well, we're not fighting each other inter-county. We're all together, especially those that are located reasonably close to each other. We can work together. What one county may have as a weakness, the other county may have as a strength. And I see mayor associations. We have one in two of the counties that I represent, and it's working pretty well. We have a recruiter for 3 counties instead of 3 recruiters for 3 counties. So things like that work. I see it in Middle Tennessee. I see it in East Tennessee. It's a cooperative attempt. And I think it means for better results. I think we've had much better results in my particular community once we banded together with other counties. So I think it's the thing of the future. There's just not a whole lot of it. We need more in our state.
Mr. Lee.
You're talking really about leadership, I believe. Leadership is bringing people with different ideas, with different strengths, people that traditionally might be competing interests, and putting them around the table and setting a common vision and a common goal and saying, how can we accomplish this together? I'm in a best practices peer industry group where we have companies from different regions, different states actually come together and talk about how it is that we can cooperate and coordinate together to strengthen each one of our individual companies. We have individual job sites in our business that when we pull them together and say, how can your weaknesses become our strengths together as a company? And that's what we'd have to do with municipalities, with adjacent counties, and actually bring rural Tennessee into urban Tennessee to talk about the mutually beneficial vision that we can have for the state.
Our next question tonight is for all candidates. What motivated you to run for governor, and what has been your biggest surprise so far? Mr. Boyd.
So it starts with wanting to give back. Jenny and I believe that God's blessed us beyond our wildest dreams, and we can never give back all that we've been given. And I've also discovered that through public service, you can make a bigger difference than anything you can do privately. I learned that through my experience in creating the Tennessee Promise, something that took a nonprofit idea that I had and turned it into something that now allows every kid in the state of Tennessee to go to technical college and community college free of charge. I've done 2 volunteer stints with the governor, once as a special advisor on higher education and once as the commissioner. And through those 2 experiences, I came up with 3 key passions that I was determined to accomplish, and I needed more time to get them done. Completing the Drive to 55, making Tennessee #1 in the Southeast for high-quality jobs and the best place to start a business, and finally, to make sure that all of those distressed counties had the opportunity for success, and we had 0 distressed counties by the year 2025.
Mr. Fitzhugh.
You know, I'm still having a great life. It's not over yet. But, I just looked at what I've been able to be a part of, and I just knew that I wasn't ready. I wanted to do what I could to give others the opportunities that I had. From a guy who'd never even been on a college campus much to a guy that graduated with 2 degrees from UT. I just want others to get that. And I look at my grandkids. And I think they're going to be all right, but there may be other grandkids that are not. And I'm having fun doing this work, and that's the biggest surprise that I've had out on meeting people and seeing the varied geography of Tennessee. But the fact of the matter is, we Tennesseans all have a lot in common.
Mr. Lee.
I've been a really blessed man, but I faced a real tragedy in my life years ago. My first wife was killed when I was 40, and I had 4 little kids, and it turned my life upside down, certainly. And I share that because it actually was the most defining season of my life. God used it in a real powerful way to change my perspective about the rest of my life. You sort out what matters and what doesn't. And I decided to engage my life in those things that mattered. Mentored a kid in the inner city that led to a passion around education. Spent an evening a week with him. Mentored a man coming out of prison once a week for years that led to a real interest in public safety. I'm a guy who has spent most of my life trying to make life better for 1,200 plumbers, pipe fitters, welders, and decided maybe the highest call for my life was to spend my life making life better for 6.5 million people, and that's why I'm running.
Mr. Dean.
Well, I've spent really almost all my adult life in public service, and the issues that I'm talking about in this campaign are things that I've worked on before, and I think this is an office where you can get some things done. Education is a passion of mine. Creating jobs is something we did in Nashville that I want to do all over the state. And I think having a safe community and looking after each other and taking care of health is really, really important. I think the state wants a governor who's going to be someone who has experience, but somebody who's going to be practical, pragmatic, kind of get it done, not hung up on being an extremist or party lines, but just somebody who wants to get it done. So basically, I want to be mayor because I want to work hard. I want to be governor because I want to work hard. I want to get things done, and I want to make life better for Tennesseans.
Let's take a moment for one more rapid-fire question. As governor, how will you stay grounded? Mr. Boyd.
My wife does that for me every day, so I just keep her close at hand.
Mr. Dean.
Well, I mean, family, wife and children, dogs, everybody keeps you pretty grounded around the house.
Mr. Lee.
I've referenced my faith. I stay grounded by waking up in the morning and spending the first part of my day reminding myself who matters and what matters.
Mr. Fitzhugh.
Well, I'll say the same thing. My wife, certainly. I've been in the governor's office hundreds of times, sort of like being called the principal's office, and it'll ground you when you're there, because there's a lot that a governor does, so it'll keep you grounded.
One more rapid-fire question. What's your guilty pleasure? Mr. Boyd.
Oh, me first. Cookies. I love cookies.
Mr. Fitzhugh.
Well, I like to travel a little bit. I like to look at the Tetons. I've been out there a couple of times, and I just can't believe they're real, so.
Mr. Lee.
I can't decide if Craig's answer of Jack Daniels or my first answer of moon pie is better. But no,
You can do both. Why choose?
not at the same time, but.
Mr. Dean.
Well, right now would be taking an afternoon off, laying on the couch and watching baseball.
Gotcha. Our final question now. Of course, all of you will answer. We've heard from you on a wide variety of topics, from education to healthcare to economic development. Now that we've had this conversation, how are all of these issues connected, and how will you develop a comprehensive plan to address all of the challenges? Mr. Lee.
Oh, they're all connected because they all impact every single person that lives in the state. They're connected because this race is not about, and being the governor is not about being a governor. It's about people. It's about Adam, the little inner city kid that I mentor that's going to have a remarkable graduation from high school. It's about the ex-offender that I spend weekly with. Its life has been transformed, not because of me, but has been transformed because of his desire to change. This is about people in urban centers, in rural communities, in suburban areas, and they're all interconnected because of a desire that I have. They're interconnected for me because of a desire that I have to serve those people in Tennessee.
Mr. Fitzhugh.
I sort of say it's people first. It truly is. My motto has been people matter, and I think it's people first. I think it's progress for all, and I think it's Tennessee always. You put those things together and you end up with things like good health care, good education, good place to live, being a part of that American dream. It's still out there. It doesn't take much, but for some, they need that little help. And I think that's what groups us all together as Tennesseans.
Mr. Boyd.
So Saturday, I had a life-changing event. Some of these guys have been tracking this, so they've heard me talk about it coming forward. But Saturday, Jenny and I became grandparents for the first time. I have another little girl named Wiley May that's joined us. I want to make Tennessee the state of opportunity. Opportunity for Wiley May, but opportunity for everybody. Opportunity for better education. Not everybody's going to go to college, but everybody needs to have the opportunity to have a great job. Opportunity for great jobs. These things are connected. If we develop a great workforce, then we're going to be able to bring great quality jobs. We also want to make it a great state for starting a business and growing a business. And lastly, as we focus on tonight, opportunity for everyone. We want to make sure they're not leaving people in our rural communities and our inner cities behind. And if we can do those things, I think we can be the state of opportunity.
Mr. Dean.
I think it's about the future. It's about hope. I think we want to be a state that addresses all the needs of all of our citizens when it comes to education, that we address all the needs that people have when it comes to having good paying jobs, and that we provide health care and people have access to health care no matter who they are, whether they have disabilities, pre-existing conditions, or of low income. I think we want to have the hope that we're all going to strive to make sure that whether it's rural poverty or whether it's urban poverty, that we're not going to ignore it. I think we want to have the hope that we realize we live in a beautiful state.
Mr. Dean, I apologize. We are running out of time to go off the air. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, candidates and our partners.